The bucket of dirty water sloshed as Lily Reeves dragged it across the wooden planks of the Grand Hotel's lobby, her knees aching something fierce as she scrubbed at a particularly stubborn stain that some drunken miner had left the night before. It was March of 1876 in Custer, Dakota Territory, and the spring thaw had turned the streets into rivers of mud that seemed to flow directly into the hotel, where she spent 14 hours a day on her hands and knees, making the floors shine for people who never bothered to look down at her. The morning sun cut through the windows in sharp angles, illuminating dust motes that danced above her bent head, and she pushed a strand of dark hair away from her face with the back of her wet hand, leaving a streak of soap across her cheek. She was 20 years old, though she felt twice that most days, and her only company was the rhythmic sound of the brush against wood and the occasional footstep of the hotel owner, Mr. Thornton, who would grunt his disapproval if he saw so much as a speck of dirt anywhere. The door swung open with such force that it banged against the wall, and Lily looked up from her work to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright morning light. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out a man in dusty traveling clothes, his hat pulled low over his face, spurs jingling with each step as he crossed the threshold. He stopped just inside the doorway, and she realized with a sinking feeling that he was standing right where she had just finished cleaning. His boots were caked with the same mud that covered everything in Custer this time of year, and she watched with resignation as clumps of it fell onto her freshly scrubbed floor. "Sorry, miss," the man said, his voice low and rough like gravel in a stream. He stepped carefully to the side, trying to minimize the damage, and Lily saw his face properly for the first time. He had sharp features weathered by sun and wind, a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble, and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray that reminded her of storm clouds gathering over the hills. There was something in those eyes that caught her attention, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. "Did not mean to mess up your work." "It is nothing," Lily said, though they both knew it was a lie. She would have to scrub that section all over again, and her knees were already raw beneath her worn skirt. "May I help you find someone?" The man removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed a trim, and held it in both hands as he approached the front desk. "Name is Preston Lawson. I am looking for a room and maybe some information about work in the area. Just rode in from Cheyenne." Lily stood up slowly, her joints protesting, and wiped her hands on her apron. "I will fetch Mr. Thornton for you. He handles the rooms." She started toward the back office, but the man called after her. "Wait," Preston said, and something in his tone made her pause and turn back. He was looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something between curiosity and concern. "How long have you been working here?" It was an odd question, and Lily felt herself bristle slightly at the personal nature of it. "Near about 2 years now." "Why do you ask?" Preston set his hat on the desk and leaned against it, studying her face in a way that made her self-conscious. She was aware of how she must look to him, with her threadbare dress and worn apron, her hair escaping from its pins, her hands red and chapped from the harsh lye soap. "Just seems like hard work for someone so young is all." "Work is work," Lily said, lifting her chin with as much dignity as she could muster. "I am grateful to have it. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to fetch Mr. Thornton." She turned on her heel and walked quickly toward the back office, her heart beating faster than it should have been. Something about the way Preston Lawson had looked at her unsettled her, not in a frightening way, but in a way that made her aware of herself as something more than just a pair of hands that scrubbed floors. She had not felt that way in a very long time, not since her father had died of fever 2 winters ago and left her alone in the world with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. Mr. Thornton was a portly man with a red face and perpetually sweaty palms, and he followed Lily back out to the lobby with his usual irritated expression, as if every guest who walked through the door was a personal inconvenience. "What can I do for you?" he asked Preston without preamble. While the two men discussed rates and availability, Lily returned to her scrubbing, working her way around the fresh mud that Preston had tracked in. She tried not to listen to their conversation, but it was impossible not to overhear in the small lobby. Preston was asking about cattle work, about ranches in the area that might be hiring, about the gold mines that had brought so many people flooding into the Black Hills. Mr. Thornton was not particularly helpful, giving short answers and clearly more interested in collecting payment for the room than in assisting a stranger. "Room is $2 a night, payable in advance," Mr. Thornton said. "Take it or leave it." Preston counted out the money without complaint, and Lily heard the clink of coins on the wooden desk. "I will take it for a week to start. Might stay longer depending on what I find." "Suit yourself," Mr. Thornton said. He pulled a key from the board behind him and tossed it onto the desk. "Room 12, second floor. No drinking, no women, no trouble." "Understood," Preston said evenly, though Lily detected a hint of amusement in his tone. He picked up the key and his saddlebags, and as he turned toward the stairs, his eyes found Lily's for just a moment. She looked away quickly, focusing intently on a spot that did not really need scrubbing. The rest of the morning passed in its usual tedium. Lily finished the lobby floor and moved on to the dining room, then the hallways on the first floor. Her back ached and her hands were raw, but she kept working because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering how her life had once been different. Her father had been a school teacher, and they had lived in a small but comfortable house on the edge of town. She had been learning to read and write, had dreams of maybe becoming a teacher herself someday. But fever took people without caring about their dreams, and when the debts came due, the house had been sold and Lily had found herself on the street with nowhere to go. Mr. Thornton had offered her work and a small room in the attic in exchange for what he called honest labor, though the hours were long and the pay was barely enough to keep her fed. She slept on a thin mattress on a floor that creaked with every movement, and she owned exactly 2 dresses, both of which had been mended so many times they were more patches than original fabric. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but it was survival, and survival was enough. She was emptying her bucket out back when she heard boots on the wooden walkway beside the hotel. Preston Lawson appeared around the corner, looking like he had cleaned up some after securing his room. His face was shaved now, revealing the strong lines of his jaw, and he had changed into a fresh shirt, though it was still clearly work clothes. He tipped his hat to her when he saw her. "Afternoon, miss," he said, "heading out to see what opportunities Custer has to offer." Lily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. There was something about this man that made her nervous in a way she could not explain. It was not fear exactly, but rather an awareness that something about her orderly, predictable life was about to shift in a way she could not control. "I do not suppose you could point me toward any ranches that might be hiring?" Preston asked, stepping closer. Mr. Thornton was not exactly forthcoming with information. "Mr. Thornton is not forthcoming with anything," Lily said before she could stop herself, and then she flushed, worried that someone might overhear her speaking ill of her employer. "The Riverside Ranch is about 5 miles west of town. Mr. Carson runs it. He is usually looking for hands, especially this time of year with calving season coming up." "Riverside Ranch," Preston repeated as if committing it to memory. "Much obliged." He started to walk away, then turned back. "What is your name, if you do not mind my asking?" "Lily," she said quietly. Lily Reeves. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Reeves," Preston said with a warmth that caught her off guard. "I have a feeling I will be seeing you around." He walked off down the street, his long strides eating up the muddy ground, and Lily stood there holding her bucket, watching him go and wondering why her heart was beating so fast. She shook her head at her own foolishness and went back inside to continue her work. There was no point in letting herself think about a man like Preston Lawson, a drifter who would probably be gone as soon as he earned enough money to move on to the next town. Men like that did not concern themselves with girls who scrubbed floors for a living. But that evening, as she was finishing up the last of the day's work, Preston came back to the hotel and found her sweeping the stairs. The lobby was empty except for the two of them, the other guests having gone out for supper or retired to their rooms. The light was fading outside, casting long shadows through the windows. "Miss Reeves," Preston said, and she jumped slightly, not having heard him come in. "I am sorry, I did not mean to startle you." "It is fine," Lily said, gripping the broom handle. "Did you need something?" Preston looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I got the job at Riverside Ranch. Start tomorrow morning, but I was wondering if you might join me for supper at the restaurant down the street. I know it is forward of me, but I do not know anyone in town, and you were kind to me this morning with the directions." Lily stared at him, certain she had misheard. No one had ever asked her to supper before, at least not since her father died. And certainly not someone who looked like Preston Lawson, with his storm-gray eyes and his quiet confidence. "I do not think that would be appropriate," she said finally, though part of her wanted desperately to say yes. "Why not?" Preston asked, and he sounded genuinely puzzled. "Because I am nobody," Lily said bluntly. "I scrub floors. You should not be seen with someone like me." Preston's expression hardened, not with anger but with something that looked like determination. "I do not care about that. I am asking you as one person to another. Will you have supper with me?" Lily opened her mouth to refuse again, but what came out instead was, "Yes." She surprised herself with the answer, but once it was spoken, she found she did not want to take it back. A smile transformed Preston's face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Good. Can you be ready in half an hour?" "I will meet you outside," Lily said quickly. If Mr. Thornton saw her leaving with a guest, there would be hell to pay. "But I cannot stay out late. I have to be up before dawn tomorrow." "Half an hour," Preston confirmed, and he headed up to his room, taking the stairs two at a time. Lily stood there for a moment, wondering what she had just agreed to, and then she rushed up to her attic room to change. She only had one other dress, and it was not much better than the one she wore for work, but at least it was clean and had fewer patches. She washed her face and hands in the basin of cold water she kept by her bed and tried to tame her hair into something presentable. There was no mirror in her room, so she had no idea if her efforts were successful, but when she slipped out the back door of the hotel 30 minutes later, Preston was waiting for her, and the look on his face told her that he found her appearance satisfactory. They walked down the main street together, and Lily was acutely aware of the curious looks from people they passed. Custer was a small town, and gossip spread faster than wildfire. By tomorrow morning, everyone would know that the new cowboy at Riverside Ranch had taken the hotel cleaning girl to supper. The thought made her stomach twist with anxiety, but Preston seemed oblivious to the attention, keeping up a steady stream of conversation about his travels and the places he had seen. The restaurant was small and warm, with red checked tablecloths and the smell of roasted meat filling the air. Preston held the door for her and guided her to a table in the corner, away from the other diners. When they sat down, Lily realized she had no idea how to act in a situation like this. She had eaten in restaurants before when her father was alive, but that felt like a lifetime ago. "Have whatever you want," Preston said, handing her a menu. "My treat." Lily looked at the prices and felt her eyes widen. Even the cheapest items cost more than she made in a week. "I am not very hungry," she lied. "Maybe just some soup." Preston gave her a knowing look. "When was the last time you had a proper meal, Miss Reeves?" The direct question caught her off guard. "I eat," she said defensively. "Mr. Thornton provides meals as part of my wages." "That does not answer my question," Preston said gently. "When was the last time you had a meal that was not leftovers or scraps?" Lily felt her face flush with shame. She wanted to be angry at him for prying, but she could see that his concern was genuine. "A long time," she admitted quietly, "but I manage just fine." "I am sure you do," Preston said. "But tonight you are going to have a real meal. Please. It would make me happy." There was something in his eyes that made it impossible to refuse. Lily nodded slowly, and when the waiter came, Preston ordered roast chicken with potatoes and vegetables for both of them, along with fresh bread and butter. While they waited for the food, he asked her about her life, and she found herself telling him things she had not spoken aloud in years. About her father and his love of books, about how he had died and left her with nothing, about the grinding reality of her work at the hotel. "I am sorry," Preston said when she finished. "That is a heavy burden for someone so young to carry alone." "I am not looking for pity," Lily said, more sharply than she intended. "I am just explaining why I cannot afford to lose my job. Mr. Thornton may not pay much, but at least I have a roof over my head." The food arrived then, and Lily had to force herself not to fall on it like a starving animal. The chicken was tender and perfectly seasoned. The potatoes were creamy with butter, and the vegetables were fresh in a way that made her realize how long it had been since she had eaten anything that was not half spoiled. Preston watched her eat with a satisfied expression, barely touching his own plate. "Tell me about you," Lily said between bites, suddenly self-conscious about how much she had been talking. "Where are you from? What brings you to Custer?" Preston leaned back in his chair, his expression growing distant. "I am from Nebraska originally. My family had a farm there, but it failed during the grasshopper plague of '74, lost everything. My parents and younger sister moved back east to live with relatives, but I could not see myself stuck in some city factory. So I have been drifting, working cattle and horses wherever I can find work, trying to save up enough to maybe start my own place someday." "That sounds lonely," Lily said softly. "It is," Preston admitted, "but it is also freedom. No one telling me what to do or where to be, just me and the open country." He paused, then added, "Though lately I have been thinking that freedom might not be worth much if you have no one to share it with." There was something in the way he said it, the way his eyes met hers across the table, that made Lily's breath catch. She set down her fork, suddenly not hungry anymore despite the delicious food in front of her. "Mr. Lawson." "Preston," he interrupted gently. "Please call me Preston." "Preston," she said, tasting the name on her tongue. "Why did you ask me to supper, really?" He was quiet for a long moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "This morning when I walked into that hotel and saw you on your hands and knees scrubbing that floor, you looked up at me and I saw something in your eyes. Strength. Dignity. Pride, even though you had every reason to be bitter about your circumstances. And I thought to myself, there is a woman who deserves better than the hand life has dealt her." He reached across the table and very carefully took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, and Lily felt a shock run through her at the contact. "I know we only just met, and I know I have no right to say any of this, but I would like to get to know you better, if you are willing." Lily looked down at their joined hands, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. Everything in her practical mind told her to pull away, to thank him politely for the meal and to go back to her safe, predictable life of scrubbing floors. But there was another part of her, a part she had thought dead and buried with her father, that wanted to take this chance, to see where it might lead. "I am willing," she whispered, and when she looked up, Preston was smiling at her with such warmth that she felt something tight and painful in her chest begin to loosen. They finished their meal in comfortable conversation, and Preston told her more about his travels, about the cattle drives he had been on, and the wild country he had seen. Lily found herself laughing for the first time in what felt like years, surprised by how easy it was to talk to him, how comfortable she felt in his presence. When they finally left the restaurant, the sky was full of stars and the street was quiet, most of the town having already retired for the night. Preston walked her back to the hotel, and they stood outside the back door for a moment, neither quite ready to say good night. "I will be leaving early for the ranch," Preston said, "but I will be back in town on Sunday. May I see you again?" "I work on Sundays," Lily said regretfully. "Mr. Thornton does not give me a day off." Preston's jaw tightened. "That is not right. Everyone deserves a day of rest." "The world is not fair, Preston," Lily said gently. "I learned that a long time ago." He looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he just nodded. "Then I will come by the hotel when I can, even if it is just to say hello." "I would like that," Lily said, and she meant it. Preston reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a moment against her cheek. "Good night, Lily Reeves. Sweet dreams." "Good night, Preston Lawson," she replied, and she slipped inside before she could do something foolish like kiss him. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Preston came by the hotel whenever he could, usually in the evenings after he finished his work at the ranch. Sometimes they would sit on the back steps and talk while Lily took a break from her scrubbing, and other times Preston would help her with her work, carrying heavy buckets of water or moving furniture so she could clean beneath it. Mr. Thornton did not like it, but he could not complain too much since Preston was paying for his room, even though he spent most nights out at the ranch in the bunkhouse. Lily found herself looking forward to these visits with an intensity that frightened her. Preston made her laugh, made her feel like a person rather than just a servant. He treated her with a respect that she had forgotten existed, listening to her opinions and asking for her thoughts on things. And gradually, as the spring progressed and the mud dried up into dust, she realized that she was falling in love with him. It was a terrifying realization. Love was a luxury she could not afford, a risk she could not take. If Preston left, which surely he would eventually, it would break something in her that she was not sure could be repaired. But even knowing that, she could not seem to stop the flood of feelings that washed over her every time she saw him. One evening in late April, Preston arrived at the hotel with a troubled expression. Lily was sweeping the lobby when he walked in, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, setting aside her broom. Preston looked around to make sure they were alone, then said quietly, "Mr. Carson at the ranch. He offered me a permanent position. Foreman job starting next month. Good wages, my own cabin, stable work." Lily felt her heart sink even as she forced a smile. "That is wonderful news, Preston. You must be very pleased." "I would be," Preston said slowly, "if I thought you were happy about it." "Why would my feelings matter?" Lily asked, though she knew she was being deliberately obtuse. Preston stepped closer, so close she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. "You know why, Lily. We have been dancing around this for weeks now. I care about you, more than care about you. I have fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and Lily felt tears prick at her eyes. She wanted to say it back, to tell him that she loved him too, but the practical part of her brain was screaming warnings. Preston, you know this cannot work. You will have your own cabin, your good job. I am just a cleaning girl. People would talk. Let them talk, Preston said fiercely. I do not give a damn what people think. I want you with me, Lily. Not as a cleaning girl, not as anything other than who you are. I want you to marry me. Lily staggered back as if he had struck her. Marry you, Preston? We have only known each other for a few weeks. I know, he said, following her. And I know this is sudden and probably not the proposal you dreamed of when you were a girl. But I am sure about this, Lily. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I want to build a life with you. I want to give you the future you deserve. I do not know what to say, Lily whispered, her mind reeling. Say yes, Preston urged. Or if you are not ready for that, then at least quit this job. Come stay at the boarding house in town while you think about it. I will pay for the room. Just get away from here, from Mr. Thornton and his exploitation. You are worth so much more than this. Before Lily could answer, Mr. Thornton's voice cut through the lobby like a whip. What is going on here? They both turned to find him standing in the doorway of his office, his face red with anger. Are you bothering my employee, Mr. Lawson? I am talking to my friend, Preston said evenly, though Lily could hear the steel in his voice. That is not a crime. She is on my time, Mr. Thornton said, walking toward them. And I will not have her standing around gossiping with guests when there is work to be done. Miss Reeves, get back to your duties. She has been working for 14 hours straight, Preston said, his voice hardening. She deserves a break. What she deserves is to be grateful for the job I gave her when no one else would, Mr. Thornton snapped. Now, Miss Reeves, unless you want to find yourself out on the street, I suggest you pick up that broom. Lily felt humiliation wash over her, made worse by the fact that Preston was witnessing it. She bent to retrieve her broom, but Preston caught her arm gently. You do not have to take this, he said quietly. Walk away with me right now. I will take care of you. It was tempting, so tempting that Lily almost said yes. But fear held her back, fear of the unknown, fear of depending on someone else, fear of what would happen if things did not work out between them. I cannot, she said, her voice breaking. I am sorry, Preston, I cannot. She pulled away from him and picked up her broom, keeping her eyes on the floor so she would not have to see the hurt on his face. She heard him take a deep breath, heard his boots on the wooden floor as he walked to the stairs, heard him climb them slowly. And then he was gone, and she was alone with Mr. Thornton, who was glaring at her with undisguised contempt. If I catch you wasting time with that cowboy again, you will be out on your ear, he said. Do I make myself clear? Yes, sir, Lily whispered, and she went back to sweeping, even though her vision was blurred with tears. She did not see Preston for 3 days after that. He stopped coming by the hotel, and Lily told herself it was for the best. He would forget about her, find someone more suitable, someone who was not too much of a coward to take a chance on happiness. She threw herself into her work with renewed vigor, scrubbing floors until her hands bled, as if she could somehow wash away the ache in her chest. On the 4th day, she was cleaning the dining room early in the morning when she heard raised voices in the lobby. One of them was Mr. Thornton's, and the other was Preston's, and both men sounded angry. Lily set down her brush and crept to the doorway to listen. I am telling you for the last time, Mr. Lawson, your interference with my employee is not appreciated, Mr. Thornton was saying. Miss Reeves is perfectly content with her position here. She is being exploited and you know it, Preston shot back. 14-hour days, barely enough pay to feed herself, sleeping in an attic like a servant. It is unconscionable. How I run my business is none of your concern, Mr. Thornton said coldly. and I think it would be best if you found accommodations elsewhere. Your presence here is no longer welcome." "Fine by me," Preston said, "but I am not leaving town until I have spoken with Lily." "Where is she?" "She is working," Mr. Thornton said. "And she does not wish to speak with you. She told me so herself." That was a lie, and Lily felt anger flare in her chest at the manipulation. She stepped out of the dining room doorway before she could second-guess herself. "That is not true," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I never said that." Both men turned to look at her. Mr. Thornton's face was thunderous, but Preston looked at her with such hope that it made her chest tight. "Miss Reeves, get back to your work immediately," Mr. Thornton ordered. "No," Lily said, and the words seemed to echo in the lobby. She had never defied him before, had never dared, but something in her had broken these past few days, or maybe something had finally healed. "No, I will not." Preston crossed the lobby in 3 long strides and took her hands in his. "Lily, I am sorry. I should not have pushed you the other day. I was too forward, too presumptuous. But please just listen to me for 1 minute." "I am listening," Lily said softly. "You deserve better than this," Preston said, his gray eyes intense. "You deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. You deserve to have time to rest, to laugh, to live. And I want to give you that if you will let me. Not because I pity you or because I think you need rescuing, but because I love you. I love your strength and your courage and the way you keep going even when things are hard. I love the way you smile at me when you think I am not looking. I love everything about you, Lily Reeves, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." Lily felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were not tears of sadness or frustration. "I love you too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have been so scared to say it, but I do. I love you, Preston." He pulled her into his arms and she buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and soap and something uniquely Preston. She could feel his heart beating against her cheek, strong and steady. "This is highly inappropriate," Mr. Thornton sputtered. "Miss Reeves, if you walk out of here with this man, do not expect to have a job to come back to." Lily lifted her head and looked at her employer, this man who had given her work but had also taken advantage of her desperation for 2 long years. "Then I will not be coming back," she said clearly. "I quit, Mr. Thornton, and you can scrub your own floors from now on." She untied her apron, let it drop to the floor, and walked out of the Grand Hotel with Preston Lawson's arm around her shoulders. The morning sun was bright on her face, and she had no idea what came next, but for the first time in 2 years, she felt free. Preston took her to the boarding house run by Mrs. Fletcher, a kind woman in her 50s who asked no questions, and showed Lily to a small but clean room with an actual bed and curtains on the windows. "Stay here as long as you need to, dear," Mrs. Fletcher said, patting Lily's hand. "Mr. Lawson has already paid for a month in advance." When they were alone in the hallway, Lily turned to Preston. "You did not have to do that." "I wanted to," Preston said simply. "And I meant what I said about marriage, Lily, but I will not rush you. Take your time. Get used to not working yourself to the bone, and when you are ready, we can talk about the future." Over the next few weeks, Lily discovered what it was like to live rather than merely survive. She slept late for the first time in years, waking naturally to sunlight streaming through her window instead of to the harsh voice of Mr. Thornton demanding she get to work. She took walks through Custer, noticing details of the town she had never had time to appreciate before. She helped Mrs. Fletcher with light housework in exchange for her keep, but the older woman refused to let her do anything strenuous, insisting that she needed time to recover her strength. Preston visited her every Sunday, his one full day off from the ranch, and they would spend hours together, sometimes walking out to the creek that ran west of town, sometimes just sitting on the porch of the boarding house and talking. He told her about his plans for the future, about how he wanted to eventually buy his own land and raise horses. She told him about her father, about the books he used to read to her, and the dreams she had once had of becoming a teacher. "You could still do that," Preston said one warm afternoon as they sat by the creek, watching the water flow past. "Teach, I mean. We could start a school on our land once we have it. There are plenty of children out here who do not have access to education. Our land." Lily asked, her heart skipping a beat at the possessive pronoun. Preston turned to her, his expression serious. "I know I said I would not rush you, and I meant that. But Lily, I need you to know that when I think about my future, you are in every part of it. I cannot imagine building a life that does not include you." Lily reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "I was so scared before, scared of depending on someone else, scared of what would happen if you left. But these past weeks, getting to know you better, seeing how patient and kind you are, I realize that the only thing I should be scared of is letting my fear keep me from happiness." Preston shifted closer to her on the creek bank. "Does that mean what I think it means?" "Yes," Lily said, smiling through sudden tears. "Yes, Preston Lawson, I will marry you." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Lily felt like she was finally, truly home. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling, and Preston pulled her close against his side as they watched the creek flow past, planning their future together in quiet voices. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Custer. Mrs. Fletcher stood as witness, along with Mr. Carson from Riverside Ranch, who had turned out to be a much kinder man than Mr. Thornton had ever been. Lily wore a new dress that Preston had bought for her, simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Mrs. Fletcher had picked that morning. The ceremony itself was brief, but when the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Preston kissed her in front of God and witnesses, Lily felt a joy so profound it was almost painful. This was real. This was her life now. She was no longer Lily Reeves who scrubbed floors at the Grand Hotel. She was Lily Lawson, wife to Preston, and her life was full of possibilities. Preston had been staying at the ranch in the foreman's cabin, a small but sturdy structure with 2 rooms and a porch that looked out over the grasslands. He had spent his free time fixing it up, making it comfortable for Lily. When he carried her over the threshold that evening, she looked around in wonder at the home he had created for them. There was a real bed with a quilt that Mrs. Fletcher had given them as a wedding gift, a table and chairs, a wood stove for cooking, and curtains on the windows that let in the golden evening light. "It is not much," Preston said, setting her down gently. "But it is ours, and we can make it into whatever we want." "It is perfect," Lily said, and she meant it. After sleeping in that cold attic for 2 years, this cabin felt like a palace. They settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Lily took over the cooking and the keeping of the cabin, but it was different from her work at the hotel. This was her home, her space, and she was working for herself and Preston rather than for an employer who viewed her as little more than a possession. Preston was gone during the days, working with the cattle and supervising the ranch hands, but he always came home to her in the evenings, and they would sit together on the porch and watch the sun set over the plains. By summer, Lily had discovered that she was pregnant, and the news filled them both with a mixture of joy and terror. Preston became even more protective of her, insisting that she not overwork herself, that she rest frequently, that she eat well. Lily found his concern both touching and occasionally exasperating, but she understood it came from a place of love. "I will not let anything happen to you or the baby," he told her one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "I promise you that." "I know," Lily said, covering his hand with hers. "And I promise you that I will be careful, but Preston, I am not made of glass. I will not break." He smiled at that, kissing her forehead. "I know that too. You are the strongest person I have ever met, but let me take care of you anyway. It makes me happy." The baby was born the following February, a boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's eyes. They named him Daniel, after Lily's father, and Preston held his son with such tenderness that Lily fell in love with him all over again. Watching him rock their baby to sleep, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice, she thought about how far she had come from that day when she had been scrubbing floors at the Grand Hotel, believing that her life would never be anything more than hard work and exhaustion. Daniel grew into a lively child, curious about everything, and by the time he was 2, Lily discovered she was expecting again. Their second child was a girl they named Rose, who inherited her father's storm-gray eyes and her mother's quiet determination. The cabin that had once seemed spacious now felt crowded with 2 children, and Preston began talking seriously about saving up to buy their own land. "Mr. Carson has been good to us," Preston said one evening as they watched Daniel and Rose play on the porch. Daniel was 4 now and Rose was nearly 2. "But I want something that is ours, that we can pass down to our children. Land where we can build a real house, start that school you always wanted, raise horses like we talked about." "How much would we need?" Lily asked practically. She had been keeping careful track of their finances, saving every penny she could. Preston pulled out a piece of paper where he had been doing calculations. "I have been talking to some people. There is land available south of here, good grassland with water access. We would need about $2,000 for a decent parcel, plus money for building materials and livestock." It was a staggering sum, more money than Lily had ever imagined having, but Preston had been saving his wages for years, and between his salary as foreman and the careful economizing Lily had been doing, they were closer to that goal than she would have thought possible. "We could do it," she said slowly. "Maybe in another year or 2 if we are careful. We will do it," Preston said firmly. "I made you a promise that day at the hotel, Lily. I told you that you would never scrub another floor again, and you have not. But I also promised myself that I would give you the life you deserved, and I mean to keep that promise." True to his word, by the time Rose was 3 and Daniel was 5, they had saved enough to purchase 160 acres of land 15 miles south of Custer. The land was beautiful, rolling grassland with a creek running through it, and a small stand of cottonwood trees that would provide shade. Preston and Lily stood on their new property, holding hands while their children ran through the tall grass and felt the weight of accomplishment settle over them. "This is ours," Lily said wonderingly. "Really ours. Really ours," Preston confirmed. "And now the real work begins." He was right about that. The next year was one of the hardest of their lives, but also one of the most rewarding. Preston and several men he hired built a house, a real house with multiple rooms and a stone fireplace and glass windows. Lily worked alongside them when she could, helping with the lighter tasks, cooking meals for the workers, planning the layout of each room. They dug a well, built a barn, put up fences, and through it all their love for each other only grew stronger. By the time they moved into the house in the spring of 1882, 6 years after that day in the hotel lobby, Lily was pregnant with their 3rd child. She stood in the doorway of their new home, one hand on her swollen belly, and watched Preston teach Daniel how to ride a horse while Rose played with a kitten they had acquired from a neighbor. The evening sun painted everything gold, and Lily felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. "Are you all right?" Preston asked, coming over to her with concern on his face. He was 31 now, still strong and vital, though there were lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. "I am perfect," Lily said, and she meant it. "I was just thinking about that day you walked into the hotel, covered in mud, and looked at me like I was a person instead of just a cleaning girl." Preston pulled her gently into his arms, careful of her belly. "You were never just anything to me. From the first moment I saw you, I knew you were special." "You told me I would never scrub another floor again," Lily reminded him, "and you kept that promise." "I intend to keep all my promises to you," Preston said, kissing her softly, "for the rest of our lives." Their third child, another boy they named Thomas, was born that summer in their own home, attended by the doctor from Custer and Mrs. Fletcher, who had become like a mother to Lily. Preston paced outside the bedroom, worried despite having been through this twice before, and when Lily finally called for him to come meet his new son, there were tears on his face. The years that followed were good ones, filled with the challenges and joys of raising a family and building a ranch. Preston's skill with horses became well known in the area, and they were able to earn a good living training and selling quality animals. Lily started the school she had always dreamed of, teaching not just her own children, but also the children of neighboring ranches and farms. The one-room schoolhouse Preston built for her was simple but functional, and Lily loved every moment of standing in front of her small class, sharing the knowledge her father had given her. Daniel grew up to be steady and responsible like his father, while Rose was adventurous and bold, always climbing trees or riding horses too fast. Thomas was the quiet one, thoughtful and observant, spending hours watching his father work with the horses and asking endless questions. When Daniel was 12, Rose 10, and Thomas 8, Lily discovered she was pregnant once more. A surprise but a welcome one. This time she gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Sarah, who kept the whole household in chaos with their energy and mischief. Preston, now 41 and with gray starting to show in his dark hair, took to fatherhood of 5 children with the same patience and love he had always shown. He built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, and in the evenings, he would sit by the fire with whichever child needed his attention, helping with lessons or listening to stories about their day. Lily, at 38, felt that her life was full in a way she had never imagined possible. She thought sometimes about that frightened girl she had been, scrubbing floors at the Grand Hotel, believing that hard work and survival were all she could expect from life. If she could go back and tell that girl what the future held, she would not have believed it. True love, a husband who cherished her, 5 healthy children, her own land, her own home, meaningful work teaching children. It seemed like something from a fairy tale. One evening, when the twins were 5 and the older children were nearly grown, Lily and Preston sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over their land. Daniel, now 17, was off courting a girl from a neighboring ranch. Rose, 15, was in the barn tending to a mare that was due to foal. Thomas, 13, was reading by lamplight inside, and the twins were finally asleep after a day of running wild. "Can you believe it has been nearly 15 years?" Preston asked, his arm around Lily's shoulders. "Since that day I walked into the hotel. Some days it feels like yesterday," Lily said. "Other days it feels like a lifetime ago." "Any regrets?" Preston asked, and though his tone was light, Lily could hear the seriousness beneath it. She turned to look at him, this man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had loved her when she felt unlovable, who had kept every promise he had ever made to her. His hair was more gray than dark now, and there were deep lines around his eyes and mouth, but to her he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him in the hotel lobby. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "You gave me everything I never dared to dream of. A home, a family, a purpose. You showed me what love really means." "You gave me the same," Preston said softly. "I was drifting before I met you, Lily. No direction, no real purpose. You gave me something to work for, something to build toward. You made me want to be better, to do better." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the evening, the cattle lowing in the distance, the horses moving in the barn, the cicadas beginning their night song. This land, this life, they had built it together from nothing but determination and love. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night at supper?" Lily asked. Preston thought for a moment. "I said a lot of things that night. You said that freedom might not be worth much if you have no one to share it with," Lily reminded him. "I think about that sometimes. How we both found freedom, but not in the way we expected. I was freed from Mr. Thornton and that awful life, yes, but more than that, I was freed from being afraid, from thinking that I did not deserve good things. You did that for me." "You did the same for me," Preston said. "I was free to go wherever I wanted, but I was also free from connection, from responsibility, from love. That is not really freedom at all. True freedom is choosing where you want to be and who you want to be with, and then building that life with your own hands." Lily leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, breathing in his familiar scent. "I choose you," she said quietly. "Every day for the rest of my life I choose you. And I choose you," Preston replied, kissing the top of her head. "Always." The children grew and eventually started lives of their own. Daniel married his sweetheart and started his own ranch 5 miles to the east. Rose, true to her independent nature, became a teacher herself, moving to Rapid City to work in a larger school. Thomas stayed on the ranch, taking over more and more of the daily operations as Preston grew older, and eventually married a quiet girl from Custer who loved horses as much as he did. The twins, inseparable as always, both became nurses, working together at the hospital that had been built in Custer as the town grew and prospered. Preston and Lily grew old together on the land they had built. Preston's hair went completely white, and his hands, once so strong and sure, began to tremble with age. Lily's dark hair grayed and her face lined, but her eyes remained as bright and determined as they had been that day in the hotel lobby. They watched their grandchildren grow, taught them to ride and to read, told them stories about the old days when Custer had been nothing but a collection of rough buildings and mud streets. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full of noise and laughter, children running underfoot, babies crying, adults talking over each other. Lily stood in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she had cooked thousands of meals for her family, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Are you crying, Mama?" Rose asked, coming to put her arm around her mother. She was 47 now, with gray in her own hair, but to Lily she would always be that bold little girl climbing trees. "Happy tears," Lily assured her, "just thinking about how blessed I am." "We are the blessed ones," Rose said firmly. "You and Papa showed us what real love looks like. How to work hard, how to treat people with dignity, how to build something lasting. Every good thing in my life I learned from watching you too." Later that evening, after most of the guests had gone home or bedded down in various rooms throughout the house, Lily and Preston sat together on the porch once more. It was June, and the night was warm with the promise of summer. The same stars that had shone down on them 40 years ago still wheeled overhead, constant and eternal. "You kept your promise," Lily said, taking Preston's weathered hand in hers. I never scrubbed another floor after that day, not for anyone but myself in my own home. Preston smiled, that same warm smile that had first captured her heart. That was not the only promise I made. I said I would love you for the rest of my life, and I have. I will keep loving you, Lily, into whatever comes next. And I will love you, Lily said, in this life and beyond. They sat together in the darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life out of determination and hope and love. The cowboy who had walked into a hotel one March morning and seen something worth saving in a girl scrubbing floors. The girl who had been brave enough to take his hand and step into an unknown future. Preston lived to be 78 years old, dying peacefully in his sleep one winter night with Lily beside him. She held his hand as he took his last breath, telling him over and over that she loved him, that she would be all right, that he could rest now. When he was gone, she felt as though part of her had been torn away, but she did not break. He had taught her strength, had shown her how to keep going even when things were hard. Lily lived another 5 years after Preston died, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still teaching occasionally when the local school needed help, still offering advice to young couples just starting out. She told her story often, especially to young women who felt trapped by their circumstances, who thought they had no options or choices. She wanted them to know that love could come when you least expected it, that it was never too late to change your life, that they were worth so much more than they might believe. She died at the age of 71, in the bedroom she had shared with Preston, in the house they had built together on the land that was their legacy. Her children were with her at the end, and her last words were about Preston, about how she could see him waiting for her, how he looked just as he had that first day in the hotel lobby, young and strong and looking at her like she was the most important person in the world. They buried her next to Preston on a hill overlooking their land, beneath a cottonwood tree that provided shade and shelter. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates, but also the inscription that Thomas had suggested and all the children had agreed upon. She scrubbed floors until the cowboy said she never would again. He kept his promise. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, and the story of Preston and Lily became part of the family lore, told and retold to each new generation. The house they had built still stood, updated and expanded over the years, but retaining its essential character. The schoolhouse where Lily had taught was preserved as a historical site, a reminder of her dedication to education and to giving others the opportunities she had dreamed of as a girl. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the grasslands and the sun set in gold and crimson glory, some of the family members swore they could see two figures sitting on the porch of the old house, hand in hand, watching over the land they had loved and the family they had created. The cowboy and the cleaning girl, together still, their love story echoing through time as proof that courage, determination, and hope could transform even the hardest circumstances into something beautiful and lasting. Their story became more than just family history. It became part of the history of Custer itself, of the Dakota Territory during those wild early days. When the State Historical Society compiled oral histories of the region, Preston and Lily's story was included, an example of how ordinary people built extraordinary lives through hard work and love. School children learned about them, about how a young woman had been brave enough to leave a secure job for an uncertain future, about how a cowboy had seen worth in someone others overlooked. The values they had lived by, respect and dignity and hard work and steadfast love, became part of their family's identity. Their grandchildren taught these values to their children, who taught them to their children in turn. The family that grew from Preston and Lily's union became known throughout the region as people of integrity, people whose word could be trusted, people who treated everyone with the same respect that Preston had shown Lily that day in the hotel. The land itself seemed to hold their memory. The creek still flowed through the property, clear and cold even in summer. The cottonwood trees had grown tall and thick, providing shelter for generations of cattle and horses. The house, though modernized with electricity and indoor plumbing in later years, retained the bones of the structure Preston had built with his own hands, each board and nail a testament to his love for his wife. On the 100th anniversary of their meeting, the family held a reunion at the ranch. Over 200 people attended, all descended from Preston and Lily, all carrying forward some piece of their legacy. They told stories, shared photographs, visited the graves on the hill. The oldest attendee was Daniel and Rose's youngest sister Sarah, one of the twins, now 102 years old and sharp as ever. She stood before the assembled family, leaning on her cane, and told the story one more time. "Your great-great-grandparents were remarkable people," she said, her voice still strong despite her age. "Not because they did anything famous or spectacular, but because they loved each other truly and treated people with respect. My father Preston saw a young woman scrubbing floors and recognized her worth when no one else did. My mother Lily had the courage to accept his help and to build a new life. That courage, that love, that recognition of human dignity, that is what they passed down to us. That is what we must pass down to our children." As the sun set that evening, the family gathered on the hill where Preston and Lily were buried. They stood together, young and old, and sang the old hymns that Lily had loved. And when the last notes faded into the twilight, there was a sense of completion, of a story told fully and well, of a love that had transcended death and time to become something eternal. The ranch continued, the land continued, the family continued, all built on the foundation of two people who had found each other in a hotel lobby in Custer, Dakota Territory, in March of 1876. A cowboy and a cleaning girl who had become so much more, who had proven that love and determination could overcome any obstacle, that every person had worth regardless of their circumstances, that promises kept and trust honored could build something that would last forever. Their story was complete, from beginning to end, from that first meeting to their final rest together on the land they loved. It was a story of transformation and hope, of seeing the potential in others and in ourselves, of having the courage to step into an unknown future with faith that love would light the way. And it was a story that would continue to inspire, to encourage, to remind people that their circumstances did not define them, that there was always hope for something better, that true love existed and was worth fighting for. In the end, Preston had kept his promise. Lily never scrubbed another floor as a servant, never lived another day feeling less than worthy, never doubted that she was loved. And Lily had given Preston what he needed too, a home and a purpose, a family and a legacy, someone to share his freedom with and make it meaningful. Together they had built not just a ranch or a family, but a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create something beautiful from nothing. Their graves on the hill overlooked the land they had claimed and tamed, the home they had built, the legacy they had created. And though they were gone, their presence remained in every sunset over the grassland, in every child who learned to read in the little schoolhouse, in every couple who heard their story and believed that love was possible, that change was possible, that a better future was possible. Preston and Lily Lawson had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind something that would endure long after they were gone. Their story was finished, complete, with no loose ends or unanswered questions. They had found each other, built a life together, raised a family, and created a legacy that would continue for generations. It was a good ending, a happy ending, the ending they both deserved. The cowboy had kept his promise, and the cleaning girl had become so much more. Together, they had created something eternal.